The corner office on the 47th floor had floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering Manhattan skyline, but Marcus Chen hadn't really looked at the view in months. Success, he'd learned, had a way of making you blind to beauty. At 52, he had everything the world told him to want: a billion-dollar tech empire, properties on 3 continents, his face on magazine covers, and absolutely no one to spend Christmas Eve with. The irony wasn't lost on him as he sat alone in his penthouse that evening, surrounded by designer furniture that had never been sat on and art that had never been admired. His assistant had left earlier, wished him happy holidays with that practiced smile people use when they don't quite mean it. His ex-wife was in Aspen with her new family. His adult children had sent obligatory texts, brief, distant, the kind you send out of duty rather than love. Even his brother had stopped calling years ago, after Marcus had missed one too many family gatherings for board meetings. The silence in the apartment was absolute. Outside, the city blazed with Christmas lights and the warmth of families gathered together. Inside, Marcus sat with a glass of scotch he didn't want, staring at a phone that wouldn't ring. He'd told himself for years that loneliness was the price of success, that relationships were distractions, that emotions were weaknesses to be managed like quarterly earnings. But tonight, Christmas Eve, the emptiness felt like it might swallow him whole. At 8 o'clock, he did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He left his building and walked. No driver, no security detail, just a man in an expensive coat wandering through streets filled with people who actually had somewhere to be. He found himself in a neighborhood he didn't recognize, far from the gleaming towers of his usual world. The buildings here were older, shorter, decorated with lights that had probably been hung with care rather than hired out. There was a small diner on the corner, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and a neon sign that buzzed. Through the window, he could see it was nearly empty. A young waitress was wiping down tables, and something about the scene, the ordinary warmth of it, the realness, pulled him inside. She looked up when the bell chimed, and Marcus saw her take him in with a quick, assessing glance. His coat probably cost more than she made in 6 months. He suddenly felt ridiculous, out of place. "Kitchen's closing in 10 minutes, she said, not unkindly. "But I can get you coffee and pie if you'd like." Coffee would be fine. He slid into a booth, grateful she hadn't recognized him. She brought it over with a slice of apple pie anyway. "On the house. It's Christmas Eve. Nobody should be alone in a diner without pie." He looked up at her then, really looked. She was younger than his daughter, probably mid-20s, with tired eyes that somehow still held warmth. Her name tag read Sarah. "Thank you," he said, and meant it more than she could know. She started to walk away, then hesitated. "Are you okay?" The question caught him off guard. When was the last time anyone had asked him that and actually wanted to know the answer? In his world, "How are you?" was just noise before business. "I don't know," he admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. Sarah pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "I've got nowhere to be. Kitchen's closed anyway, and my roommate's working a double shift at the hospital. Sometimes Christmas Eve is lonelier than Christmas Day, you know?" And somehow Marcus found himself talking, really talking for the first time in years. He didn't tell her he was a CEO or about the billions or the empire. He just told her about the silence, about how success had cost him everything that actually mattered, about the family he'd neglected until they'd stopped trying. Sarah listened without judgment, without advice, without trying to fix anything. She just listened, and somehow that was everything. "My mom died 3 years ago," she said quietly when he'd finished. "Cancer. My dad left when I was 10, and I don't have any siblings. I worked 2 jobs trying to finish nursing school. And most days I'm so tired I can barely see straight. But you know what I learned? Money and success, they're not bad things. But they can't hold your hand. They can't laugh at your jokes. They can't stay up with you when you're scared." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. "How did you get so wise so young?" She smiled. "I'm not wise. I'm just lonely enough to recognize it in someone else." They sat in silence for a moment, and it was the most companionable silence Marcus had experienced in years. "Can you stay for just one night?" Sarah asked suddenly. "I mean, not like that. I just mean, don't go back to that empty apartment tonight. There's a midnight service at the church down the street. I was going to go alone, but it would be nice to have company." And after, maybe we could just walk around and look at the Christmas lights. Sometimes the simplest things are the best cure for loneliness. Marcus should have said no. He should have gone back to his penthouse, to his carefully controlled world where vulnerability was weakness and emotions were liabilities. Instead, he said yes. They went to the service together, two lonely people in a church full of families. They sang carols. Marcus hadn't sung in decades, and his voice cracked. Embarrassingly, afterward, they walked through the neighborhood, and Sarah pointed out her favorite decorations. A house with inflatable reindeer, an apartment building where every window had a different color light, a bodega owner who'd strung lights in the shape of a menorah. See that building? Sarah pointed to a shabby brownstone. That's where I live. 3rd floor. The heating barely works and I can hear my neighbors' entire lives through the walls. But Mrs. Chen on the 2nd floor always makes extra dumplings on Sundays, and Mr. Rodriguez lets me borrow his Netflix password. And everyone looks out for each other. It's not much, but it's home. Marcus thought about his penthouse, with its perfect temperature control and soundproof walls that ensured he never had to hear another human voice. It sounds wonderful, he said, and realized he meant it. At 2 in the morning, they stood on a corner where their paths would diverge. Sarah looked up at him with those tired, warm eyes. "Thank you for staying," she said. "I know you probably think you were doing me a favor, keeping me company, but really you saved me from a pretty lonely night." "No," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved me. You have no idea what you gave me tonight." She smiled and squeezed his hand. "Merry Christmas, stranger. I hope whatever you're looking for, you find it." She walked away into the early morning darkness, and Marcus stood there watching her go. This young woman who'd shown him more kindness in a few hours than he'd experienced in years of billion-dollar deals and power lunches. He went home as the sun was rising on Christmas morning. His penthouse looked the same, but he saw it differently now, not as a trophy, but as a prison he'd built for himself. He picked up his phone and called his daughter. It rang 4 times before she answered, her voice sleepy and surprised. "Dad, is everything okay?" "I just wanted to say Merry Christmas," Marcus said. "And I'm sorry. For all of it. For not being there. I'd like to change that if you'll let me. I'd like to try being a father again." There was a long pause. Then, "Dad, are you crying?" "Maybe," he admitted. "Is that okay?" His daughter's voice softened. "Yeah, Dad, that's okay. Merry Christmas. Come over for breakfast?" "I'd like that." As he got ready to go meet his daughter and grandchildren he'd barely seen, Marcus thought about Sarah. He'd never gotten her last name. Would probably never see her again. But she'd given him something. Priceless, the reminder that kindness and connection were what made life worth living. That vulnerability was a strength, not a weakness. And that sometimes the most important gifts come from the most unexpected sources. The CEO who had everything finally understood that he'd had nothing at all, until one lonely waitress asked him to stay for just one night, and in doing so, gave him back his humanity.